so people at home, we just read the first 3 vignettes. You should have read those. Make sure you read the PowerPoint and take a look at that. It gives you some background about Sandra Cisneros, the author, and a little bit about the house on Mango Street and how it's set up. Okay. Now we are going to work on this. You should all have copies of this. Okay. People in class, let's get it. Figurative language and voice in the house on Mango Street. So some of this stuff is going to be reviewed. You should know these terms. Okay. We're just going to talk about them anyway. All right. First term, simile. Right. Gives you the definition. Right. A comparison of two ideas using like or as. Can somebody give me an example of a simile? Anybody? Make one up. Pick one up off the top of your head. Anybody? Christian, you look like you want to say something. Perfect. She roared as loud as a lion, right? Beautiful. Simile. Metaphor. Like a simile, right? Comparison of two ideas directly with no, like, or as. Anybody have an example of a metaphor? I could give you one, right? If I were to say, school is heaven. Yes? You'd all be in agreement? No? He's like, school is hell? No? Somewhere in the middle, right? Somewhere in the middle. Okay? You are comparing two things, in this case, school and hell or school and heaven, without the like or as. There is just a direct comparison. School is this, okay? Just as a refresher. Personification. Giving human-like characteristics to something that is not human. It says non-human objects. I prefer to say something that is not human, okay? It is not necessarily an object, although most of the time it is with personification, right? Because technically, I could personify a plant, right? A plant is a living thing. It's not necessarily, it's just not human, right? I could personify a plant. I could personify a horse or something like that. Now, anybody have an example of personification? Kirsten. The flowers danced in the breeze. Perfect, right? We know flowers don't dance. We are giving a human characteristic to the flowers. Flowers don't dance, but humans do, or humans are capable of dancing. Understood? Personification, okay? Alliteration. Repetition of a sound and letter within a phrase of words, usually consonants, okay? So when we talk about alliteration, we are typically talking about the initial consonant sound in the word, right? All of those tongue twisters you are accustomed to hearing. Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers, right? The way that all those words begin with P or the P sound constitutes alliteration, yes? Now, in terms of you identifying alliteration, what you don't need is a string of 6 words, right, that have the same beginning sound, okay? If you can give me at least 2 words that have the same beginning sound, I will count it for what we're doing today, all right, in terms of identifying alliteration. Remember, very often it is the letter. More importantly, it is about the sound. So if I say kitty cat, even though the 2 letters are different, the sound is the same, right? Even though there's a K and a C, the sound is the same. We will count that as alliteration. Understood? All right. Imagery. And this kind of came up in the last assignment you did, right? When you were doing the poetry thing and you were responding to it, they kind of asked you in a roundabout way if it appealed to any of your 5 senses, okay, if you did that assignment. Okay? Paint a picture through words using the 5 senses, the definition of imagery. Now, with imagery, good authors do this. Nobody likes to read the story that doesn't have imagery, right? You want the story to be able to paint a picture in your head in terms of what is going on. That means they are descriptive about the way something looks, the way something smells, the way something feels, etc., right? Anything that appeals to your 5 senses, 1 or more of your 5 senses. So you picking out imagery, you're going to be looking for those things. You may have to be a little bit creative, but you should be able to find examples of all of these. In fact, in this one, you'll see on the right side where it says example, it gives you each one of the senses. You just have to find one example from the first 3 vignettes that fits each one of those senses. Does that make sense? So you were looking at the first 3 for this entire worksheet. You're looking at the first 3 vignettes, and you can fill out, a metaphor or whatever from any one of the 3. And they're asking you for 2 examples of each with the exception of imagery. So for example, the top one, simile, you're going to write me 1 example of a simile in the first box, another example of a simile in the second box. One simile can come from vignette number 1 and the other one can come from vignette number 3. It does not matter where you get them from. Okay? Clear? Clear? All right. Last one. Flip it over. Last one is hyperbole. Definition, exaggeration, extreme exaggeration. Okay? Anybody have an example of hyperbole that jumps out to them? Anybody? A common one is, I'm so hungry I could eat a cow. Or I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Right? We understand that you're never so hungry you can eat an entire cow. Or an entire horse. Right? But you are expressing the level of hunger that you have by exaggerating it, right? Going to school, going back, some of you probably felt like this. Going back to school after this quarantine is going to kill me. Right? I've gotten lazy sitting on the couch, right? It is not actually going to kill you. You are exaggerating, but we get your point. Understood? That is hyperbole. All right. Any questions about what you're going to be doing? Okay, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to work on that before we move on to the other work, okay? And then I'll be up here. If you have questions, please, please, please ask. Okay, you don't know whether or not something fits or something like that, I'll come take a look. We've worked on figurative language, and now we're moving on to the next assignment, okay? On your iPad, look at the agenda. Underneath where you clicked on the last assignment, there'll be another assignment that says literary analysis questions. Click on that. It should open up. It's going to look like this. Now, don't be confused. Normally, I print these out and I cut them. So if yours will have multiple copies of the same thing on the same document. Okay. And you'll see it should have 6 questions. Yes, 6 questions. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to answer these 6 questions for each one of the first vignettes. So for Mango Says Goodbye, sometimes you're going to answer 1 through 6, right? For Kathy, Queen and Cats, you're going to answer 1 through 6. And for Minerva Writes Poems, you're going to answer 1 through 6. You're going to write the answers on your own sheet of paper, take a photo, submit it on Canvas, as always. Understood? Okay. So how many questions are you answering? Total? 18. Very good. You should have 18 answers. Okay. Now, let's talk about, let's go through question by question, make sure we all understand what's going on. Okay. So, number 1 says, how would you describe the author's tone? We talked about tone being author's attitude. Are there words in the text that would indicate the author's tone? Now, for those of you who are in class, tone and mood words on the back, right? Just as some examples. If you're at home, look up some tone and mood words, or maybe you don't have to look up anything. Maybe you just know what's going on. How would you describe the author's tone? So how would you describe the author's attitude in this particular vignette, right? The author, I want you to think about the main character, Esperanza, right? What is kind of her attitude in this particular vignette, okay? What would you say her attitude was for number 1? Like for the first one? If you had to give me an attitude, just as an example. Right, she talks about the street she lives on, right? She talks about how one day she's gonna go away and everybody's going to say, what happened to that Esperanza girl and all of her papers, right? And she says that they won't know that I've gone away to come back for the ones I left behind. So what would you say her attitude is? How would you describe that? Thoughts? There was some level of her being upset, right? There was some level of being upset. There are words that I think better fit it, right? If somebody lives in the hood and their attitude is all like, hey, yo, one day I'm going to get out of here. One day I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to come back for all the people I left behind. How would you describe that attitude? Say what? Determined. That's a good one, right? Determined. Like I'm going to make it regardless of, these barriers and these obstacles that I have. Determined. There's an attitude of perseverance. Like I'm going to keep going despite all of these different things. Any of those things kind of fit. Hopeful, right? Hopeful. One day I'm going to make it out of here and blah, 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 right? Any of those words would fit for tone, understood? Okay? So you simply write, determined, or whatever, that's a good one. It's not working for yours either? Okay, hold on. I actually, I anticipated this, sir. I anticipated that we might have this issue. There you go. Yep. All right. Number 2. How would you describe the mood of the piece you just read? What do we say the definition of mood is? Alan, what is it? You remember? Man, come on. It was last week, brother. It ain't been that long. Gabe, you remember? Mood, what it is, the definition?
What?
Mood. What is mood? Do you remember what that is?
Mood.
Yeah.
Just like how someone feels versus
How what?
how someone feels.
That's 75% of the way there, right? In a literary sense, what is mood? Gabe's not wrong. I just need a little bit more, right? He said the way someone feels, right? But again, we're referring to mood in a literary sense. So what do I mean? Mr. Cannon, you remember? Then you should be ashamed of yourself, man. You should be ashamed of yourself. Bo, no? Gardner, mood? You remember? You just, what? Man, look, this was going to happen. I'm coming here next week, quiz. You better know it. You better know what mood and tone are, okay? Mood, we talked about being, mood is all about, so Gabe said the way someone feels. Again, that's not wrong, but we're thinking in a literary sense. It is, when you read a piece of writing, how does it make you feel? What feeling does it evoke within you? How does it make you feel, right? So how someone is feeling. Now, that being said, how would you describe the mood of the piece you just read? This is a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer it, but that's what you're going to be answering. Understood? 3, how would you describe the author's voice or style? This one is always difficult. Like, man, I'm supposed to pick one word to describe a style, right? I put a document in there, and it may or may not have showed up already. You might have to refresh it, but I put a document at the bottom of the agenda that says words that describe voice. So when you get to that question, if you can't think of a word that will describe voice, you can always click on that document, and it gives you a ton of different words that might fit. So you kind of have a bank to pull from. If you don't know what some of them mean, don't write something if you don't know what it means, right? Don't be lazy. Take 2 seconds and Google it and see what it means, okay? 4, provide 3 examples of quotes and figurative language you see in the piece. This should be easy money because you just found all of these figurative language pieces on your other worksheets. So just steal 3 from the other worksheet if you want, right? And write them down. 5, choose a character other than the narrator of the piece. Explain how the mood, tone, and meaning of the text might be different if the character you selected were telling the story instead. Now, again, got to understand mood, got to understand tone, or you can't answer that question, okay? Perspective matters. When someone different is telling a story, it changes the story very often, right? You can take this in your personal lives. You hear about a fight that took place or something that happened at school. One person in the fight tells you the story. Sounds sometimes very different than another person who tells you the story, which sounds very different than somebody who was just witnessing it, somebody who was there from the beginning, somebody who showed up at the end, okay? How is the tone or the mood different? Okay, how is the attitude? How would the attitude be different? How might the way it makes you feel be different? Now, the trick here is in two of the 3 vignettes, there are other characters. But in the first one, there are no other characters. So what do you do in terms of picking someone else? I want you to pretend as if there's another character. You can pretend like you're the mailman on that block, right? How would you feel differently? What I've had students do in the past is she mentions the house, so they personify the house instead, and they say, okay, if I'm the house, how am I feeling about all of these things that are going on, and how am I telling this story, right? Just as an example. Any questions about that? A little bit abstract, but it makes sense, okay? 6, use of imagery. You did some work with that on your previous worksheet, okay? How would you describe the author's depiction of the character's surroundings or environment? So when it asks that question, how would you describe the author's depiction of the character's surroundings or environment? What it's really asking you is, what does the author say this place looks like? How does the author describe this place, right? I'm asking you to describe how the author describes it, but it's simply asking, how does the author describe this place? Oh, the author describes this as the most beautiful place ever. A place filled with joy and happiness, right? That would be your answer, right? And then it asks for specific examples to support your answers. So if you're telling me that the author describes Mango Street as this perfect place and this beautiful place and this wonderful place, which we know that's not the case, but I'm using this as my example, right? What you're going to do is say, the author describes it as such and such, and here are my examples why. You're going to give me a quote or two, or something that shows that it matches, that it's beautiful, etc. Understood? Okay. If you don't support your answer, I'm going to mark it wrong. All right, so make sure you support your answers. Questions about any of that? Pretty straightforward. Figurative language and voice worksheet, which a lot of you flew through and were doing well with, since you had no questions, I'm assuming. And then literary analysis questions. 1 through 6 for each of the first 3 vignettes, 18 questions total. Got it? And it is due when? Tomorrow. Always the next day, unless I tell you otherwise, tomorrow. So it should be submitted on Canvas tomorrow. And in the past, I said anytime tomorrow, but during the school day, preferably, right? Preferably. Sometime between 7:05 and 2:40, preferably, right? Because that'll probably be the time where I can get to it to grade it. And if not, I will probably won't grade it until the next day. But I understand things happen, but let's just try to get it in around that time. All right? All right, go to it.